Stop me if this sounds familiar. You mess up at work, and suddenly you're telling yourself you're a complete failure. Someone criticizes you, and you're convinced you're worthless. You make one mistake, and your brain turns it into a catastrophe about your entire life. Here's what's wild. You'd never talk to a friend this way, but you do it to yourself all day long. I spent 50 years studying why intelligent people torture themselves with irrational thinking, and I found 5 specific mental habits that absolutely murder self-respect. And I guarantee you're doing at least 3 of them right now. Here's what you're going to get in the next 25 minutes, and I'm not going to waste your time with feel-good fluff. I'm going to show you 5 specific mental habits that research and 50 years of clinical practice have proven destroy self-respect. More importantly, I'm going to show you exactly how to recognize them in your own thinking and what to actually do about them. Now, I know what you might be thinking. Great, another self-help video telling me to think positive and love myself. That's not what this is. I don't believe in positive thinking if it's not based in reality. What I believe in is rational thinking, clear thinking, thinking that actually serves you instead of torturing you. Here's the problem most people face. You've been practicing these mental habits for so long that they feel true. They feel like facts. When you think I'm worthless because I failed, that doesn't feel like an opinion. It feels like reality, but it's not. It's an irrational belief that you've reinforced thousands of times until it became automatic. And that's actually good news, because if these habits were learned, they can be unlearned. If these thought patterns were built, they can be rebuilt. You're not stuck with the mental habits. They're destroying your self-respect. You can change them, but first you have to see them clearly. So here's what we're going to do together. I'm going to walk you through each of these 5 mental habits. I'll show you exactly what they look like in real life, why they're irrational, how they kill your self-respect, and most importantly, what to do instead. Not theory, not wishful thinking, practical strategies that actually work. The people I've worked with who made these changes, they didn't just feel better. They fundamentally changed how they related to themselves. They stopped being their own worst enemy. And that's available to you too. But you've got to be willing to question thoughts you've never questioned before. You ready? Let's go. The first mental habit that kills self-respect is what I call masturbation. And yes, I made up that word deliberately because this habit is just as destructive as it sounds. It's when you take preferences and turn them into absolute demands. You go from I prefer to do well to I absolutely must be perfect or I'm worthless. Listen carefully. There's a massive difference between wanting to do well and demanding perfection. One is healthy motivation. The other is a recipe for misery. When you demand perfection from yourself, you're setting up a game you cannot win. Because perfection doesn't exist. It's not real. It's a fantasy. And when you base your self-respect on achieving a fantasy, you're guaranteeing your own suffering. Here's how this works in your brain. You start with a reasonable preference like I want to do a good job. But then your irrational thinking kicks in and transforms it into I must do a perfect job. And if I don't, it proves I'm a failure. See the difference? You've taken a preference and turned it into an absolute demand with catastrophic consequences attached. And here's the really insane part. You probably don't even notice you're doing this. It happens so fast and so automatically that you think it's just normal thinking. But it's not normal. It's irrational. And it's destroying your self-respect every single day. When you demand perfection, you create an impossible standard. And when you inevitably fail to meet that impossible standard, because you're human, you take that failure as evidence that you're worthless. You just set yourself up to fail and then punish yourself for failing. That's not self-improvement. That's self-torture. I've seen this destroy successful people. I had a client who was a surgeon, literally saving lives, who had zero self-respect because he made one small error in a procedure. One error out of thousands of successful procedures. But because he demanded perfection, that one error became evidence that he was incompetent. See how irrational that is? This guy had saved hundreds of lives. He had an incredible success rate. He was respected by his peers. But none of that mattered because he'd made one mistake. And in his mind, that one mistake proved he wasn't good enough. That's what happens when you demand perfection. You discount all your successes and magnify every failure until the failures are all you can see. Here's what rational thinking looks like. I strongly prefer to do well, and I'll work hard to achieve that. But I don't need to be perfect to have self-respect. I can make mistakes and still be a worthwhile person. See the difference? You keep the motivation, but you drop the demand. You keep the standards, but you drop the catastrophic thinking. This isn't lowering your standards. This is being rational about your standards. You can aim for excellence without demanding perfection. You can work hard without making your worth dependent on never failing. You can have high goals without destroying yourself when you fall short. Let me ask you directly. Show me one person who's perfect. Just one. You can't because they don't exist. So why are you demanding something from yourself that literally nobody has ever achieved? That's not high standards. That's irrational thinking. And it's killing your self-respect. Now, that's the first habit, demanding perfection. But it gets worse. Because once you've set up these impossible standards, the second mental habit takes over and really does some damage. And this one is so common, you probably do it multiple times a day without even noticing. The second mental habit that murders self-respect is catastrophizing. This is when you take one negative event, one mistake, one failure, one criticism, and you blow it up into a catastrophe about your entire life. You generalize from one specific event to your total worth as a human being. And it's completely insane. Here's what this looks like in real life. You forget someone's name at a party, and suddenly you're not just someone who forgot a name. You're socially incompetent. You make an error in a report, and you're not someone who made a mistake. You're a total failure. You get rejected once, and you're not someone who got rejected. You're completely unlovable. See the pattern? You're taking specific events and turning them into global judgments about yourself. Let's break down why this is irrational. If you burn dinner tonight, does that make you a bad cook? Maybe. Does it make you a failure at cooking? Possibly. Does it make you a failure as a human being? Absolutely not. But that's exactly the leap your brain makes when you catastrophize. You're taking evidence from one domain, cooking, and using it to make a judgment about your total worth. That's like saying because you can't play piano, you're worthless. It doesn't make logical sense. But when you're in the middle of catastrophizing, it feels completely true. Listen to your self-talk. Do you use words like always, never, completely, totally? Those are catastrophizing words. I always mess up. I never get it right. I'm completely incompetent. I'm totally worthless. These absolute words turn specific events into catastrophic generalizations. I had a client who lost a client at work. Not her job. One client. And she told me, I always fail at everything. Always? Everything? I asked her to list 10 things she'd succeeded at that week. She came up with 20. But her brain had taken one negative event and catastrophized it into I always fail at everything. That's not reality. That's catastrophic thinking. And you know what the crazy part was? She didn't even lose the client because of her performance. The client's company was downsizing. It had nothing to do with her work quality. But her brain immediately jumped to I always fail at everything. That's how powerful this habit is. It distorts reality so completely that you can't even see the facts anymore. When you catastrophize, you can never build self-respect. Why? Because even when you succeed at 99 things, the one failure becomes evidence of total worthlessness. You're giving negative events 1,000 times more weight than positive events. You're running a rigged game where you can never win. Think about it. If one mistake proves you're a failure, but one success doesn't prove you're successful, you've created a system where self-respect is impossible. You've literally made it impossible to feel good about yourself, no matter what you achieve. Here's the rational approach. I made a mistake. That's unfortunate, and I can learn from it. But one mistake doesn't define my entire worth. It's a specific event, not a global judgment. See how that changes everything? You acknowledge the mistake, but you don't catastrophize it into a character flaw. You can even take it further. I made several mistakes this week. That means I'm human. I also had several successes this week. That also means I'm human. Neither the failures nor the successes define my total worth because I'm not my performance. I'm a person who sometimes succeeds and sometimes fails, like every other person on the planet. Think about when you were learning to walk as a baby. You fell down hundreds of times. Hundreds. If babies catastrophize the way adults do, none of us would ever walk. Imagine a baby falling and thinking, I always fail at everything. I'm completely incompetent at walking. I'll never be able to do this. That sounds ridiculous, right? But that's exactly what you do as an adult. You just do it with more sophisticated vocabulary. So you've got demanding perfection. You've got catastrophizing. But the third mental habit might be the sneakiest of all because it sounds like you're being humble. You're not. You're being irrational. And it's destroying your self-respect from the inside out. The third mental habit that kills self-respect is rating your entire self based on your performance. This is the belief that your worth as a human being goes up and down based on what you achieve or fail to achieve. And this might be the most widespread, irrational belief in modern society. Here's what I mean. When you do well, you feel like a good person. When you fail, you feel like a bad person. Your self-respect is completely tied to external outcomes. You're essentially saying, I'm only worthwhile when I succeed. And that's insane, because it means your worth is constantly fluctuating based on things you can't always control. Let me be clear about something. You can rate your performance. That's rational. You can say I did well on that project, or I did poorly on that test. That's evaluating specific behaviors and outcomes. But you cannot rate yourself. You cannot give yourself a grade as a human being. Why? Because you're too complex. You're not a single thing that can be measured. You're a person with thousands of traits, behaviors, thoughts, and actions. Some are good. Some are bad. Most are neutral. Try to add them all up and come up with a single rating for your total worth? That's not just irrational. It's impossible. But people do it anyway. And then they tie their self-respect to that imaginary rating. When the rating is high, they feel good. When it drops, they feel worthless. They're on an emotional roller coaster based on a rating system that doesn't even make logical sense. Here's the trap. When you tie your worth to your performance, you become terrified of failure. Because failure doesn't just mean you failed at a task. It means you failed as a person. Your worth has decreased. You're less valuable as a human being. And that fear of failure, it paralyzes you. It makes you avoid challenges. It makes you play it safe. It makes you stop trying new things because the risk to your self-rating is too high. I've seen brilliant people turn down opportunities, avoid relationships, and stay in miserable situations because they were terrified that trying and failing would prove they're worthless. I worked with a woman who had the chance to apply for a major promotion. She was qualified. She had the experience. Her boss encouraged her to apply, but she didn't. Why? Because what if she didn't get it? In her mind, not getting the promotion would prove she was a failure. So she didn't even try. She stayed in a job she hated because trying and failing felt more dangerous than never trying at all. That's what happens when you rate yourself based on performance. Here's what's really twisted about this habit. Even when you succeed, you can't enjoy it. Why? Because if your worth is tied to achievement, you can never achieve enough. There's always another goal, another standard, another person who's doing better. Your self-respect is constantly threatened by the possibility of failure. I've worked with incredibly successful people, people with impressive careers, relationships, achievements, who had zero self-respect. Why? Because they tied their worth to performance, and they knew that performance could always decline. They were one failure away from feeling worthless. That's not self-respect. That's conditional self-acceptance that can be taken away at any moment. Here's the alternative I teach: unconditional self-acceptance, not unconditional self-esteem, which is often based on performance. Unconditional self-acceptance, the idea that you accept yourself as a worthwhile person simply because you're alive, not because you achieve, not because you're perfect, not because you never fail, just because you exist. This doesn't mean you don't try to improve. It doesn't mean you don't have standards. It means your fundamental worth isn't on the table. You can fail at tasks without being a failure. You can make mistakes without being a mistake. You can perform poorly without being poor. Your performance varies. Your worth doesn't. Get that distinction clear. and you just freed yourself from one of the most destructive mental habits that exists. You can work to improve your performance without attacking your worth. You can set goals without making your value dependent on achieving them. You can fail without falling apart. Think about it this way. Imagine rating a forest based on one tree. That would be ridiculous, right? The forest is made up of thousands of trees, plants, animals, streams, all interacting in complex ways. You can't look at one dead tree and say the entire forest is worthless. But that's what you do when you rate your total self based on one performance. You're too complex to be reduced to a single rating. Now, those first three habits are about how you judge yourself. But the fourth habit is about how you handle other people's judgments. And this one traps more people than almost anything else I've seen. The fourth mental habit that destroys self-respect is the desperate need for approval. This is the belief that you must have the approval of others to be worthwhile. That if someone criticizes you, judges you, or doesn't like you, that somehow proves you're defective or worthless. And let me be direct. This is one of the most destructive beliefs you can hold. Here's the irrational thinking. If that person doesn't approve of me, it means something is wrong with me. If people criticize me, I must be bad. If someone rejects me, I'm unlovable. You've handed control of your self-respect to other people. People you can't control. People whose opinions might be completely irrational. Let's think about this logically. How many people are there in the world? Billions. How many different standards, preferences, and opinions do those billions of people have? Infinite. So you're trying to get approval from billions of people with infinite different standards. That's not just difficult. It's impossible. Even worse, those standards often contradict each other. Some people will think you're too aggressive. Others will think you're too passive. Some will say you talk too much. Others will say you don't talk enough. If you base your self-respect on getting everyone's approval, you've just signed up for guaranteed failure. I had a client who was devastated because her mother-in-law criticized her parenting. Devastated, like it proved she was a bad mother. So I asked her, is your mother-in-law's opinion the absolute truth about parenting? She said no. Do other people think you're a good mother? Yes. Then why are you giving this one person's opinion the power to destroy your self-respect? She had no answer. Because it was irrational. Her pediatrician thought she was doing a great job. Her husband thought she was a wonderful mother. Her friends admired her parenting. Her kids were happy and healthy. But none of that mattered because one person with very different parenting values disapproved. And that one disapproval outweighed everything else. When you need approval to feel worthwhile, you've literally handed your self-respect to other people. They control how you feel about yourself. If they approve, you feel good. If they criticize, you feel worthless. You're giving random people who might be irrational, uninformed, or just having a bad day, control over your fundamental sense of worth. Think about how insane that is. Some stranger can be in a bad mood, snap at you, and suddenly you feel like a terrible person. Someone with completely different values can disapprove of your choices, and you question your entire life. You've made yourself a puppet, and other people are pulling the strings. Here's something crucial. Criticism is just someone's opinion. That's all it is. It might be accurate. It might be completely wrong. It might be partially true. But it's not an objective fact about your worth. When someone criticizes you, they're sharing their perspective. Their perspective might be useful information, but it's not the final word on your value as a person. And here's the thing. Sometimes people criticize you because they're jealous. Sometimes because they're insecure. Sometimes because they're projecting their own issues. Sometimes because you threaten their worldview. If you accept every criticism as truth, you're not being humble. You're being irrational. I've seen people completely change their lives based on one person's criticism. I had a client who loved painting. She'd been painting for years. It brought her joy. She was getting pretty good at it. Then someone at an art show made a dismissive comment about her work. One comment, and she stopped painting entirely. She gave up something she loved because one person didn't approve. That's the tyranny of needing approval. Here's how to think about approval rationally. I prefer when people like me and approve of me. That's pleasant, but I don't need their approval to have self-respect. Their opinion is information, not truth. I can consider it, Learn from it if it's useful, and discard it if it's not. But I don't give it the power to define my worth. You can value relationships without needing approval. You can listen to feedback without being devastated by criticism. You can prefer acceptance without demanding it. The key is understanding that other people's opinions are about them, their standards, their preferences, their issues as much as they're about you. And honestly, some people just won't like you. That's reality. You're not everyone's cup of tea, and that's okay. Neither is anyone else. Even the most beloved people in history had critics. Abraham Lincoln had people who hated him. Mother Teresa had critics. If you need universal approval to have self-respect, you've signed up for a lifetime of misery. So we've covered 4 massive habits: demanding perfection, catastrophizing, rating yourself, and needing approval. But the 5th one might surprise you because it sounds like wisdom. It's not. It's the voice of irrational guilt, and it's been destroying people's self-respect for generations. The 5th mental habit that kills self-respect is what I call shoulding. And yes, that's deliberate. This is when you constantly tell yourself what you should be doing, how you should be feeling, what you should have done differently. And every should is a little message that you're not good enough as you are, that you're somehow wrong or defective. Listen to how you talk to yourself. I should be more productive. I should be happier. I should have done better. I shouldn't feel this way. I should be further along by now. Every single one of those statements is you beating yourself up for not being different than you are. And that destroys self-respect faster than almost anything. Here's what's happening when you should on yourself. You're taking preferences and turning them into moral obligations. You're saying that not only would it be nice if things were different, but they must be different, and the fact that they're not proves something is wrong with you. I should be more confident really means I'm defective for not being more confident. I should have known better means I'm stupid for not knowing. I should be over this by now means I'm weak for still struggling. Every should carries a hidden self-attack. And most of the time, these shoulds are completely arbitrary. Who says you should be more confident? According to what standard? Who decided you should be over this by now? Where's that written? You're following rules you never agreed to, judged by standards you never chose, and beating yourself up when you don't comply. This one really gets me. I shouldn't feel this way. People come to me all the time saying they shouldn't be anxious, they shouldn't be angry, they shouldn't be sad. And I ask them, why not? You're human. Humans have emotions, sometimes unpleasant ones. The fact that you feel anxious doesn't mean something is wrong with you. It means you're alive. But when you tell yourself you shouldn't feel what you feel, you create a double problem. First, you've got the unpleasant emotion. Second, you've got guilt and shame about having that emotion. Now you're anxious about being anxious, depressed about being depressed, angry at yourself for being angry. You've just made everything worse. I worked with a guy who came to me feeling guilty about feeling anxious. He had a big presentation coming up, and he was nervous. And instead of just accepting the nervousness and preparing for the presentation, he was beating himself up. I shouldn't be anxious. I should be confident. What's wrong with me? He turned one problem, normal pre-presentation nerves, into 3 problems. The nerves, the guilt about the nerves, and the catastrophizing about what the nerves meant about him as a person. Here's reality. You feel what you feel. You can choose what you do with those feelings, but you can't should them away. And telling yourself you shouldn't feel what you're feeling is just another way to attack yourself and destroy your self-respect. I should be perfect. I should never make mistakes. I should always know what to do. I should be further along. These aren't standards, they're fantasies. And you're beating yourself up for not achieving fantasies. I ask people, according to what law of the universe should you be perfect? Show me where that's written. Show me the person who's achieved it. You can't because it doesn't exist, but you're still using should to torture yourself for not being something impossible. And here's what really bothers me. People are harder on themselves than they'd ever be on anyone else. You never tell a friend you should be perfect and you're a failure for not being perfect. But you tell yourself that every day. Why? Because you've internalized irrational shoulds that you would never apply to anyone else. I had a client who was a parent, doing a genuinely good job raising her kids. The kids were happy, healthy, doing well in school. She spent quality time with them, set appropriate boundaries, showed them love. But she was miserable because she kept telling herself, I should be a perfect parent. And every time she lost her patience, every time she made a parenting decision that didn't work out perfectly, every time her kids were upset, she took it as evidence that she was failing. I asked her, do you know any perfect parents? No. Do you think perfect parents exist? No. Then why are you demanding perfection from yourself? She didn't have a good answer. Because there isn't one. It's irrational. Here's the rational alternative. Replace should with preferences. Instead of I should be more productive, try I prefer to be more productive, and I'll work toward that. Instead of I shouldn't feel anxious, try I prefer not to feel anxious, but I do. And that's okay. See the difference? The preference version lets you work toward change without attacking yourself. It acknowledges reality without demanding it be different. It motivates without destroying your self-respect. I prefer to have done better is completely different from I should have done better. One is honest assessment. The other is self-attack. One preserves self-respect. The other demolishes it. When you drop the shoulds, something remarkable happens. You become free to actually change. Why? Because you're not wasting energy beating yourself up. You're not paralyzed by guilt and shame. You can look at reality clearly, decide what you want to change, and work toward it without the constant self-attack. You can say I'm not where I want to be, and I'm going to work to improve without adding, and I'm terrible for not being there already. You can acknowledge problems without catastrophizing about them. You can set goals without using them as weapons against yourself. So those are the 5 mental habits that absolutely murder self-respect. Demanding perfection, catastrophizing single events, rating your total self based on performance, desperately needing others' approval, and shooting on yourself. If you're doing even 2 or 3 of these, you've been making self-respect nearly impossible. But here's the good news. Let's bring this together. We've covered 5 mental habits that kill self-respect, and I want you to see the pattern. They're all forms of irrational thinking. They're all ways you take reality and distort it into something catastrophic. They're all habits you learned, which means they can be unlearned. The perfectionism demand, that's turning preferences into absolute requirements. The catastrophizing, that's turning specific events into global judgments. The self-rating, that's confusing your performance with your worth. The approval need, that's giving control of your self-respect to other people. And the shoulding, that's attacking yourself for not meeting arbitrary standards. Every single one of these habits is based on irrational beliefs. And the beautiful thing about irrational beliefs, they can be challenged. They can be disputed. They can be replaced with rational alternatives. You don't have to think this way. You've been practicing these habits for years, maybe decades, but that doesn't make them permanent. Your brain is capable of learning new patterns. You're capable of thinking rationally instead of irrationally. You're capable of having self-respect that isn't dependent on being perfect, never failing, achieving everything, or getting everyone's approval. Here's what I want you to do. Pick one of these 5 habits. Just one. The one that resonates most with you. The one you recognize in your own thinking. And for the next week, every time you notice yourself doing it, challenge it. Question it. Ask yourself, is this thought rational? Is this helping me or hurting me? What would I tell a friend who is thinking this way? You don't have to be perfect at it. You won't catch every irrational thought. But if you can start recognizing these patterns, you've taken the first step toward changing them. And that's how you build genuine self-respect. Not by being perfect, but by being rational. Not by never failing, but by accepting yourself even when you do fail. Not by getting everyone's approval, but by not needing it in the first place. Self-respect is just one piece of the puzzle. Because once you stop destroying yourself with irrational thinking, you've got to deal with the world. And the world is full of difficult people, unfair situations, and things that genuinely frustrate you. So here's the question. How do you handle frustration without making yourself miserable? How do you deal with difficult people without catastrophizing? How do you face real problems without demanding that they shouldn't exist? That's what I cover in my next video. The exact techniques I teach for handling life's actual problems without creating emotional problems on top of them. It's called How to Handle Frustration Without Losing Your Mind, and I break down the specific rational strategies that actually work when life gets difficult. You've learned to stop attacking yourself. Now, learn to handle the world rationally. Click on that video right now, and let's keep building these skills together. You deserve self-respect, not because you're perfect, but because you're human. Now go get it.